Hi, everybody, and welcome to the show. I'm really excited to be here today with Mamie Stewart. Thank you so much for being here, Mamie. How are you today?
I am doing very well. How are you today?
I'm doing really well as well. And it's so brilliant to have you here because I know that you are somebody who thinks a lot, talks a lot, and helps a lot of people with the topic of meetings and having better meetings, which is our theme for today. And so I just want to start with a question. I hear this all the time. We have too many meetings. Nothing seems to be getting done. It's so frustrating. I just want to kind of get on with something rather than always be in meetings. Why is it this is happening at the moment?
Well, I think this has been happening for a long time. So it's nice that people are finally starting to pay attention to the fact that meetings are such a problem. Why they are such a problem has many different reasons, but one of them is I think we haven't really understood how to use all of the different communication and collaboration tools at our fingertips. And so we rely on meetings to do a lot of that heavy lifting when they're not the best tool for them. So information sharing is something that has to happen in a team. And yet a meeting is not really the best place to share information. It's one-way communication. We're sitting, listening to someone, taking all that information in. And let's be honest, we mostly forget a lot of it because our brains can't hold all that information. Not the best use of a meeting. And yet that has become a predominant function of meetings. So that's just one example of how we misuse meetings as one of our communication methods or collaboration tools in our toolbox. And because we misuse them so often, they start to feel like we have so many, they're not a good use of my time, on and on and on.
I can imagine. And so that's obviously one of the big mistakes, people using meetings for the wrong type of communication. What other mistakes do you see people making with meetings as well?
Well, the number one mistake that I see people make is having a meeting where they're not clear what the outcome is. We think a lot about the activities of meetings. We're going to discuss something, we're going to brainstorm, we're going to review, we're going to whatever it might be, we're going to have conversations around a topic. But that doesn't tell you what the meeting is going to achieve. It just tells you what you're going to do in the meeting. And if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, it's really hard at the end of the meeting to feel like you got something done that wasn't just a nice conversation or a nice discussion. And so when we have all of these meetings and we put them on the calendar, and especially as managers or meeting leaders, in our heads, we might have an inkling of what we're trying to do. But if we haven't clarified it for ourselves, our team members or meeting participants definitely don't know what we're trying to accomplish, which just makes it harder to actually get the right work done in the meeting that will then allow you to build momentum and move work forward in general.
I think that's really clear. And I think that's something I can imagine lots of the listeners are sort of listening to this and nodding along and going, yep, yeah, we've got an agenda, but actually, is it really, really clear? Now, I can also imagine that there are people listening to this who are very much spending their time in lots of virtual meetings. Is there anything like really specific that you're seeing, like where people are not getting right within that environment because they're in virtual meetings with people perhaps who are not in the same locations as them? So they've really got to rely on the virtual tools to make it happen.
Yeah, I gotta say, I love virtual meetings so much because of the technology that we have available to us. I actually think they can be more productive than your in-person meetings if you use the right tools in the right ways, because they can also be significantly worse. So let's start with some of the problems or challenges of virtual meetings. One of the nicest things about meeting in person is when people walk into the meeting room and you get that little bit of chit chat ahead of time. It is really hard to do that in a virtual meeting. If you've ever sat in one where a few people are in and they start chatting and then more people join, and then you're kind of like a voyeur watching somebody else have chit chat instead of getting to turn to the person next to you and have a little conversation of your own, it's not the best way to build those relationships and have that kind of introductory time when you're meeting virtually. So that's one of those things where we have to figure out ways to use virtual tools, or at least be aware that the virtual setting is going to be more challenging. The flip side of that is when you're sitting around a room, it is hard to do a lot more than have conversation, because we can't all just hop onto a poll really quickly or throw up a Miro board and start brainstorming live with all the content directly on the board. If we use sticky notes, that's a nice thing, but you have to come prepared with all of that. It's not as simple as, oh, you know what? This would be a good moment for me to open up a board or open up a document and throw it on the screen. And it's just so easy to do those things when we're collaborating virtually. So there are pros and cons to both. And I'm happy to talk more about any of those. But it's first just recognizing that they really are different things that you're planning. And so you cannot attack them in the same way.
I completely agree. And it's really interesting because I'd love to get your thoughts about how we do meetings really well, particularly in the virtual space. But before we do, I'm really, the questions that's popping into my head is, what is the point of meetings then from your perspective? What is it, we're really trying to achieve? And I appreciate there might be specific goals depending on the team, on the mission or project they're working on. But how is it you see meetings? What are they really there to do?
So I say there are 6 reasons to have a meeting and 1 reason not to. And we already talked about the not to, which is to share information. The only time you want to share information in a meeting is when the information is complicated and confusing and nuanced. And so you really need to be checking for understanding as you're going along. If it's sensitive or highly confidential and you don't want to put it in writing, or it's about showing the people who are in the meeting respect, right? You don't want to necessarily have a tough conversation with someone over email. Even if you're sharing information, you want to give them the respect of meeting with them, sitting down, saying it to their face. So those are information sharing that's okay. Otherwise, information should happen before the meeting starts. So then why have meetings? So number 1, to brainstorm. You can brainstorm outside of a meeting, but there's something that's really energizing about brainstorming with other people and getting those juices flowing and doing multiple rounds of brainstorming so that you have that opportunity to build off each other's ideas. Second reason, and these are in no particular order, second reason is to plan. If you are working on a project and there's lots of moving pieces, you want to be able to sit down with folks and start to identify what needs to happen and who is doing what, and that just takes forever if you're not doing it live in a meeting. The third is to align. When you're running a project and there's lots of moving pieces, you want to make sure that everybody is on the same page, we all have the same updates, we're moving in sync with each other, or maybe there's some information that different people have that needs to come together so that you can coordinate. The next is to make a decision. Yes, we can make decisions over email or in chat, but some decisions you actually need to have that real-time discussion to be able to get to the best option or the best path forward. Next, we have to build relationships. It is a wonderful thing to spend time in meetings, and it could be a casual lunch meeting or a walking meeting or just a segment of your meeting where you're sitting down to just get to know people better and connect to them and build those relationships. All right, there are 2 more. So we have to produce. So there are times where you want to co-create things together. It could be collective drafting of a document, putting together a slide deck. Sometimes we want to do those things independently and get feedback, but sometimes we want to bring people together and actually build something live. And then lastly is to learn. If you want to have a conversation with a customer where you're trying to understand their experience, maybe you're running a focus group, maybe or doing a lunch and learn where you're learning from an expert. There are times where we're in the meeting so that we can gain insight from a person or from data.
Fantastic. And I love your clarity on the reasons why and also why not to have that meeting. I think that's really important. And I also see this in my work as well, in the conversations I have with my clients. Sometimes the default is just to put a meeting in the diary when there isn't that real sort of sense of why should we have this meeting? So I can absolutely understand those reasons. And I can imagine people listening to this going, okay, great, Mamie. But how do we approach this? Like if we've got this nightmare scenario today, we're in back-to-back meetings, where do we even start with thinking about changing things up? How do we even make the space to even think about that to make the changes, right?
Oh, it can feel like a big hairy mess. I have been there. So I know what you're going through. So there are a couple of things that you can do to start. So one approach is to simply start writing a desired outcome for every meeting that's on your calendar. So the different reasons to have a meeting are just the foundation of your thinking. What you actually want to get to is that very specific, this meeting is going to achieve what statement, and I call it the desired outcome. So if you open any calendar invite, you should see in the body of the invite what that meeting goal is. And if you can't think of a meeting goal, you probably don't need that meeting. And if you've been invited to someone else's meeting and they haven't told you what their goal is or what their desired outcome is, you should be asking. A simple email of them saying, hey, saw this on my calendar, just wondering, what are you trying to achieve in this meeting? Or what do you hope to achieve in this meeting so that I can prepare to contribute my best in that conversation? So that's one place to start, is not to try to eliminate all of the meetings all at once, but just go through day by day and make sure that every meeting on your calendar has a desired outcome. And if you can't think of one, it's probably not the right time to be having that meeting. Second approach is a collaborative approach, which is to have a meeting about your meetings. So bring your team together and lay out what are all the different meetings on our collective calendar. All of our weekly check-ins, our one-on-ones, the things that we do together regularly. And let's make sure that each one of those meetings is necessary and designed optimally. So there are so many different kinds of ways to have a team alignment meeting that you might have every week or every month. And there's not one right answer for each team. It's not like this is the best way to have a weekly team meeting. You've got to figure out, why are we having these meetings? Is this about building relationships? Which, for example, I worked with a client a number of years ago who had a weekly meeting that was 90 minutes long. Every team member went around and reported out what they were doing. And then that was it. And the manager was like, this is so great. Like, we're building relationships and I get to know what's going on and everybody gets to hear about what other people are doing. But then when they had this conversation, when I went in and talked to them about it, the manager loved it, but everyone else was like, this is the biggest waste of my time. Like, we're not building relationships here. I'm listening to people talk about their work, and their work doesn't impact my work. We're all running separate projects, so there's not really a reason that I need to know 20 minutes on where somebody's project stands. So after we brought this to light, it was very clear that this meeting was not serving the team, even though the manager felt like it was serving him. So we took a step back and said, so what are we really trying to do? And everyone agreed that having relationships and having colleagues was important. Because they worked so independently, that didn't really happen naturally or organically in the course of their work. So that became a primary focus. So we said, all right, well then, what kind of meeting is the right type of meeting to focus on relationship building? So they shifted from a weekly 90-minute meeting to a once a month kind of end of day, 4 p.m. pizza party. And they called it family reunion. And they said, once a month, we're going to get together, we're going to have some pizza, and we're just going to hang out. And this will be our chance to get to know each other and connect as humans. And it was so much more effective, both for the relationship building, but also for how they were all spending their time every week. But that was only part of it, because the manager, he still said, well, I still need to know what's going on with everybody's projects. We said, great. So what kind of meetings do you need for that? So he decided to do 20-minute check-ins with each person each week, just one-on-one, specifically focused on the work, not on how they were doing or anything else. Other times for that, this was a quick, where are you? What do you need from me? How can I support you? What's going on with this project? What questions or problems do we need to solve together? What decisions need to get made? And then you can keep going with the work. So those 2 meetings now were replacing one, but it was saving the team a ton of time. And it was actually helping the manager be more effective because he was getting each of those conversations in more depth because he had a little bit more time to spend with each person.
I just love that story, Mamie. And I love the way as well, because it's very much about some of those meetings that have been in the diary forever. Like the calendar has always had this like weekly meeting, this monthly meeting. It's always been this long. These people have always come to it. And it's quite hard to challenge those ingrained habits. And also particularly if, as you said, it's one person, the person who's leading the team, who really loves that meeting, but maybe others don't. So shifting now the attention now to thinking about more virtual meetings, because I love the idea of the pizza party, the kind of getting to know. how can you create more connection and build relationships through virtual meetings? Because that's something I know sometimes teams really struggle with when they're based in different locations, different countries even.
Yeah, it is a lot harder, but not impossible. So a very simple thing you can do is to start every meeting with a check-in, which is a go around and have everybody share something. And people can always opt out. They can say pass if they'd like to. And it can range from a very specific question like, what was your favorite book as a child, to something a little bit more formal like, what are you listening to or reading right now that has you thinking, to a totally wide open like, what are you doing this weekend that will bring you some joy in your life? I mean, it can be really any question that you ask, but it gives everybody a chance to go around the room in 30 seconds a person and just share something. And you'll start to see, oh, I read that book too. I love that book. Or that's really interesting that you've learned this thing. And I'd love to know more about that. Maybe I'll follow up with them afterwards and hear a little bit more. So it just gives you a moment of connection and takes maybe 5 minutes at the start of your meeting. And if you do that every time, if you actually put that onto your agenda, that will start to build deeper relationships through these little bite-sized moments. But you can also do longer things, right? You could have a monthly meeting where the whole purpose of the meeting is connection. I used to do this with my team when we were scattered across the globe. And every month for 45 minutes, we'd have somebody teach the group something that they were passionate about. Nothing to do with work. So one woman taught improv. It was really fun and kind of crazy because it's not my cup of tea, but we had so much fun and it was very doable. Another person shared their knitting project and were showing us different kinds of stitches and some of the things that they've made for their children. So it was just a chance for us to get almost like a deep dive into different people. So you can be creative and find ways to bring in that human side, because that's what we're really talking about when we were saying build connections.
I really love those examples. And it's about people revealing more about their personal side as well, right? What sits behind the camera, what sits behind somebody's work context as well.
Exactly.
Right at the start of this conversation, you also talked about the collaboration tools. And I've got quite a perspective on this as well, which is people often think that the collaboration tools are communication. So the Teams, the Zoom, the whatever the kind of the tool they're using, whether it's Slack or Trello, is the communication. But I sort of very much see it as they are the tools. We have to be quite mindful about what goes into the communication. I'm just really curious to get your perspective on that. And you've also talked about other tools on this conversation today. So I'm just really interested to see what you think works and what, how we can use the tools to enable the communication.
Yeah, so if we think about a meeting as a cycle and not an event, right? It looks like an event because it's on our calendar as from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Monday. It's the event. But there's actually 3 phases. There's before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting. And so we have these opportunities to use communication tools at each of those phases to support the meeting to be the most effective, to support our people to be able to show up prepared, engage meaningfully, and then take action afterwards. So if you think about the before the meeting, right, this is where we want to use those asynchronous tools to send context and background information, asking people to read something or watch something or think about something. And the pushback I get from a lot of managers is, well, we get so many emails. If I just send something over the transom, how am I going to know that anybody is going to review it? Or I sign pre-work and then people come to the meeting, they haven't done it. So we still have to spend the first 10 minutes of the meeting going over it anyways. The reality is, yes, people are going to miss things sometimes. But if you make it a consistent practice and you do 2 things. 1, hold people accountable to doing it. Don't review it in the meeting. If they haven't done it, that's on them. They can either step away from the meeting, read the material, and then come back in the meeting when they're ready. Or you can reschedule the meeting if no one has actually prepared. But you have to be very clear that this is the expectation for this meeting. The second thing you can do is when you send over pre-work, give people the right information to prepare. So what is it they have to read or watch or think about? How long do you think it's going to take them? And then the trick you can do is say, please respond to this email with, and then give them a question to respond to before the meeting. Please respond to this email with 3 questions that you want to make sure we cover or address in the meeting. Please respond to this email or fill out this little survey tool or input something on the document with, what you have, what you see as being the most important insights from this article that we should be considering. That way you can track who's actually completed the pre-work, because it's not just them doing it independently, but them sharing something back with you. And if you have people who you're like, they really, really, really need to make sure that they read it, like if you're having your boss come to the meeting or someone from senior leadership, you can also schedule a 5 or 10 minute check-in with them before the meeting to go over that pre-work and make sure that they have that information, especially if you know they're not going to read it because they're so busy. Just get 10 minutes on their calendar, or 5 minutes even, to give them that information that they need so that when the meeting time comes, you can dive right into the meat of it. So that's the first piece around asynchronous communication before the meeting. Then during the meeting, we have a whole different set of tools. We have different kinds of boards, mural boards and Miro boards. We have polls. We have all kinds of anonymous tools. There's just a lot we can use in the meeting, and we sometimes forget that we don't have to talk the whole time. We can actually be quiet and write things down. And this is where virtual meetings really shine, because nobody wants to type up all of the notes after. If you're doing a sticky note brainstorm in person and you have all these sticky notes, actually one great trick is you can take photographs of them and upload it into your AI tool, and now it will transcribe, but it's still a little bit messy. There's still added work for you as the meeting leader to organize all of those notes. But if you're doing a brainstorm with a virtual board, you can have people type in their content and it's there. You're done. It is saved forever. You can easily reorganize it. It can be truly anonymous, because I don't know about you, but my handwriting is very distinct, and as is a lot of people's. So sticky notes, you know exactly who wrote what. So if you're trying to get feedback or pushback on ideas or watchouts, you're more likely to get honest feedback if you're using an anonymous tool. And Miro boards are great for that, because everyone can just type in totally anonymously. So again, if we're thinking ahead of time, we can plan that meeting and design different activities to do and have those virtual tools prepared. All right, so then finally, after the meeting, now we have, how are we going to move all this forward? And this is where tools like your task manager or your project management system and your document storage, all of those things come into play for how the thinking from the meeting is going to land in the places where it becomes actionable. And if we're not, again, thoughtful about, well, we just recorded this meeting, now we have the AI notes, that's great, so what? So what are we doing with that content? It has to get from the Zoom transcript and the lovely notes and stories that it can send us into our actual work management systems. And so again, you have a tool here, we just have to sometimes do a little bit of work and thinking to make sure that everything flows and each tool is being used for its proper purpose.
I really love how you think about this. And I love the idea that it's something, a meeting is not just a one-off event. There is a cycle to this. And I also very much agree with you that it's not what happens in the room, it's what's happening before and afterwards. And I loved your tips on processes, on smart ways as well, even things like AI, of, transcribing what's happening inside the room. But also, meetings are about behaviors, right? It's also about the processes, the tools you use, but it's also about the behaviors, the ways of working, what is the right way of engaging in meetings, and perhaps what's not the right way. So I'm really curious whether you could talk to that as well. I appreciate each team is unique and will have their own set ways of workings, but do you have any sort of broad concepts or ideas at the macro level about, what are the right behaviors that make the most of meetings?
They are the right behaviors for your team. It's a lovely way to think about, like, there are so many different expectations people bring into what they should do or not do in a meeting. And the only way to actually figure out what those right things are is to talk about with your team. There are teams I've worked with who are like, we have cameras on always. If we're having a virtual meeting, everyone is expected to have your camera on. I don't care where you are. You can be in a coffee shop, go on mute, but camera on. Other teams are like, we don't really care if your camera's on as long as you're participating and you're engaged. So if you're need to go for a walk and move your body, that's fine, as long as we can tell that you're participating and you're engaged in the conversation. So there aren't just, always have to do a certain way kind of rules. It's much more about getting alignment and agreement with your team about this. These are our expectations. So things around using cameras, things around microphones. Are we going to use the raise hand feature or not? I have teams where we always use the raise hand feature, so nobody ever jumps in. And we have teams that never use it, and it's a constant popcorning. Neither is right. It's really about what's right for your team, and does everybody know that so that they can show up appropriately? Even things as simple as, what does it mean to start on time? I have teams where literally at 9 a.m., the meeting is starting, and if you show up at 9:01, you are late. And I have other teams where the norm is we start the meeting at 5 after, so that people have time to transition from whatever they were doing to the new meeting, pull up the right documents, go to the restroom, because we're all in back-to-back meetings and you actually need a couple of minutes between to shift gears. And so if you show up at 9:05, you're not late. Now we're starting on time. So you have to think with your team, what's right for us? And be as specific as you can be so that everybody has that same expectation. And note if there are exceptions. If you're home from work with a sick kid, you might need your camera off even if your rules are camera on. So how do you handle exceptions? Do you put it into the chat and say, hey, working from home, sick kid, camera's off today? Do you just assume people know if my camera's off, it means it absolutely has to be and I don't need to explain myself? So just have that conversation with your team and brainstorm together. What are the different possible norms or agreements and expectations that we want to have so that everybody's clear?
I'm so glad that you mentioned this point about time, because I think time is also such a cultural concept. And I remember I've been to meetings where the majority of the group were Japanese, and to be on time meant you had to be logging on 10 minutes early, in fact.
Yes.
It's very different concepts of time. Equally, I've been in meetings where people are coming in 20 minutes, 25 minutes late. And what was important was that they finished the previous meeting, and that was really important. But what I'm hearing you saying, and I absolutely agree, is this idea of it's about making it explicit. You can't assume everybody's got the same expectations. And I suppose that's where the frustrations come, right? If we don't talk about it and we don't actually pause to work out what the rules of engagement are.
That is true in all things in work. When we are not clear about expectations and we don't have shared understanding of expectations, it creates so much friction. And everybody thinks that they're right? It's a natural bias to be like, well, the way that I think about this, what respect looks like, what engagement looks like, how much talking I should be doing in a meeting versus how much space I should be making for others, right? For the most part, we think that the way that we're approaching the world and the way we're approaching work and relationships is the right way. But it's not, because there are lots of right ways. And if we aren't explicit with our team members about the expectations, and sometimes we do need to set them as a manager, we need to say, this is what it means to start on time for this meeting. And sometimes we need to have a conversation and say, I think we might be coming at this differently. Let's figure out what's going on here and what can we both agree to. So maybe my team members would love it if I wrote out a whole agenda before a meeting. It would make them feel really happy, but I just know that's not how I work. I'm not going to be able to put a detailed time, minute by minute agenda together. But maybe we can agree that before every meeting, what I will do is send that desired outcome. I will make sure it's in the calendar invite, and I will make sure that everybody knows what we're trying to accomplish. Can we agree that that is going to be our shared expectation? And I will hold myself accountable to it as the manager. And I expect my team, if I don't do that within 24 hours of the meeting starting, that you're going to call me on it. You're going to reach out to me and remind me, and I will get to it as soon as I can, and I will recognize that was a fail on my part, and I need to do better.
I love that idea of also holding accountability for each other, really, with meetings, making sure that it really happens. Now, I know this is a bit of a tricky question to ask, but I'm really interested. Meetings seem to be a perennial problem. It's like something people love to complain about. And as you say, this idea of what's not working with meetings is not a new problem. But what's going to change in meetings in the future? Like when you're looking at the workplace, looking at what's going on with teams, how do you think meetings are going to evolve in the next few years?
Oh, I hope they evolve to just become one of the best parts of people's day. Like meetings can be so fun. If you've sat in a good meeting and you walk out and you're like, oh, that was such a great discussion. We're so energized. We know exactly what we're going to do now. And we're all like raring to go. That should be life. Like that should be what meetings at work are like. So at a macro level, I really hope that meetings can transform from being this thing that everybody loves to hate to being something that people really look forward to because we're using them properly. So that's the first thing. Second, I think there's a lot of opportunity, not just with AI to help us with our meetings, and I've started exploring and done this with a bunch of clients, using AI to help us build agendas, which just takes off a lot of that heavy thinking that managers have to do to plan out an agenda and gives you a starting point, and then you can share that with your team, which helps them prepare even more. And we often kind of underestimate how much time something will take in a meeting, but AI can help us get better and better at planning out the appropriate uses of time and how we can do different activities and all kinds of stuff. So I think we're going to get really good at using AI to help our meetings, both in the planning and in the follow through, et cetera. And then lastly, I think there could be some cool stuff coming out with virtual reality. I can imagine that at some point we're going to be able to put on our goggles or our headset and it will start to feel a lot more like we're in a real room with people where we can move around and touch the same whiteboards and all that cool stuff that Zoom and Microsoft Teams and such just aren't there yet, right? We still feel like we're staring at a screen. But I can imagine the way the technology is moving that it won't be that long until we can really be in virtual rooms together.
I love that idea. And I can't wait for that moment either. I think that'd be super, super exciting. So let's hope that becomes a reality. Mamie, we've spoken about so much here today, and I'd just love to ask you, like, what's one habit or one action that you'd really love listeners to take away to make their meetings better today and tomorrow?
So I talked about writing that goal statement or your desired outcome. So I'm not going to repeat that one, even though that is always the number one thing to do. So instead, I'll focus on the end of the meeting because we didn't really talk about how to bring closure. This is kind of the second most important thing to do, which is to always, always end with your clear next steps, with a wrap up. What decisions did we make? Who is doing what by when? And is there any information that people who are not in this meeting need to know about so that they can do the work? Because sometimes people miss a meeting because they're sick, they're on vacation, they weren't invited by accident, whoops, or they're just other colleagues who didn't need to be in the meeting, but they do need to know what's going on. So if you spend 5 minutes at the end just laying out what are our next steps and specifically who is doing what by when, not the great. So someone is going to do X, Y, or Z. Very specific. Mamie is going to revise this document and share it back out with the group by Friday at noon. That's a next step. So use your end of your meeting to bring together all of the good thinking and conversation you've had into the pieces that are actually going to move it forward. Right? The decisions that were made, those action items, and the information that needs to get shared out so people can take that meeting and make it worth their while to move forward.
Excellent. Really great sort of focus for everybody who's listening today. And I'd love to know what's coming up next for you, Mamie. What's kind of your focus right now?
Well, I have 2 programs in the works. They're going to be launching in the next couple of weeks. The first is a micro workshop learning program. So for managers who want to continue to develop their skill set, it is a 30-minute micro workshop each week where you learn one skill that will help you show up more effectively and reduce your stress as a manager. So it's meant to be something really easy behaviors, simple to implement, but have big impact. So that's one program. And the second is building out your team playbook. So we were talking about the friction that comes up with misaligned expectations. So this is one of those tools, a playbook that managers can use with their team. And so it's a process that I walk you through to collaborate with your team to identify what is our mission, who do we serve, what are our values, and how do we live those every day so that we have very clear agreements about how we communicate, how we operate, and how we treat each other.
They sound fantastic. So really looking forward to seeing those go live. And how can people find out about your programs, about you, your work, and what you're up to? What's the best places to connect with you?
So you can check out my websites, themodernmanager.com. That also hosts my podcast, The Modern Manager. And you can find me at mamieks.com, MAMIEKS.com. That's my personal website that has all of my programs on it. And I'm on LinkedIn as Mamie Kanfer Stewart and on Instagram as Leadership with Mamie.
Excellent. Well, Mamie, thank you so much for joining us today. Really love this conversation. Such a practical, useful topic that touches almost everybody. And I'm sure everybody's taken away some really fantastic insights, actions, and habits that they can put into play. So thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Victoria. It's such a pleasure to talk with you.
Fantastic. And look forward to seeing everybody next time.